Committee. Good evening. I am Anitra Steele, the chair of the Forums Committee. Good evening and welcome to our forum for the Jackson County Prosecutor in the August 6th primary election. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties. The League of Women Voters is a trusted grassroots, nonpartisan organization whose members do the hands-on work to safeguard democracy. While we neither endorse nor oppose candidates or political parties, we are directly involved in the sharing of important issues. Our mission is to empower voters and to defend our democracy. We envision a democracy where every citizen has the knowledge, the right, the desire, and the confidence to participate. Our membership is open to everyone. I'd like you to know the other league members volunteering with us. Cindy Schmidt is our timekeeper, and our Zoom is monitored by Janelle Shue. The public has sent in the questions via the league's website. Tonight, our moderator is Charlie Eblin, who is a trial and appellate lawyer and a member of Shook, Hardy, and Bacon. He will be moderating this forum and asking the questions. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you. I'm delighted to join you for this Jackson County Prosecutor Candidate Forum. The Jackson County Prosecutor is responsible for prosecuting felonies and misdemeanors in Jackson County. The prosecutor's office annually receives a wide variety of cases, including but not limited to violent crimes, domestic violence, fraud and white-collar crimes, sex crimes, property crimes, traffic and DUI, drug court, and child support cases. Most of the cases processed are tried by the prosecutor's office are felonies, and most misdemeanors handled in Kansas City Municipal Courts by city prosecutors. The prosecutor serves a 4-year term. Tonight, we'll hear from 3 Democratic candidates in the primary election, which will be held Tuesday, August 6th. Forums last approximately 90 minutes. I'll ask each candidate the same question, selected from those submitted by the public. The order of candidate responses has been determined by random rotation. Each candidate will be given 90 seconds to respond to each question and 2 minutes for a closing statement. All of the candidates running for this office have been invited. We welcome the candidates participating in tonight's forum: Stephanie Burton, John Gromowski, and Melissa Johnson. This forum will be recorded and available on the League's webpage, lwvvkc.org, and on YouTube. Candidates, please answer the question asked and stick to the topic. There will be no rebuttals, but you may go back to an issue during your 2 minutes in closing. Now let us begin with the first question tonight. And the first question tonight is, what are the main responsibilities of the Jackson County Prosecutor, and what in your education and experience makes you the best qualified for that position? We will start that question with John.
First of all, good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us. So the primary responsibility of the Jackson County Prosecutor, like Charlie said a moment ago, is to make sure that felony cases are presented to an office that is prepared to take them to trial if necessary, but in any event, resolve them in some manner so that some measure of justice can be given to the community and to victims who are victims of crime. What makes me qualified to do the job is a couple things. First of all, I was once an executive officer in an infantry company in the United States Army. That's a 130 soldier unit. And so I've got sort of a leadership experience background that is important for the prosecutor to have, because it's a large law firm of over 150 people. So you need to know how to manage people and then manage cases and then deal with the community. So leadership is important. The other thing is about my background that is unique to me is the fact that I have over 2 decades of criminal justice experience as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. I've spent 16 years as a defense attorney. So the amount of time I have as a defense lawyer is greater than both the other candidates combined. I have over 6 years of prosecutorial experience, including now being in the violent crimes unit handling homicide cases. And that 6 years of experience is greater than both the other candidates combined. So between my leadership experience and my history as a lawyer, I am the best qualified for this job. And Charlie, I will say that I do not see the timer.
There are 4 seconds remaining.
Oh, you got it.
Thank you. We will now turn to Stephanie.
Thank you. The role of the prosecutor, of course, essentially is charging and prosecuting crimes that are committed in Jackson County, but also the main purpose of the prosecutor's office is to seek truth and justice and make sure that justice is attained for every victim in these cases. It's also beyond just the prosecution is collaborating with law enforcement, policymakers, the legislature, and managing the employees that work for the office. But also an important part of that, as I mentioned, with seeking truth and justice, is making sure that the person that you are prosecuting is the correct person. And it's not about just seeking convictions, but making sure that you are seeking truth and justice in the case and that you actually have the right person charged. I am the best person for this job because I have the most well-rounded experience with the criminal justice system. I have been a criminal trial attorney for the last 14 years, where I have tried over 40 jury trials and over 100 bench trials, everything from low-level drug offenses to first-degree murder. But I've also served as a probation and parole officer for the state of Missouri, and also worked with the Innocence Project and started the first ever conviction integrity unit in the state of Kansas, evaluating wrongful convictions.
Thank you. Melissa?
Yes, good evening, everybody. So in my opinion, the duty of the prosecutor's office is overseeing the prosecution of offenders to deliver justice to aggrieved victims. And I, as a former prosecutor who also tried everything from lower level drug offenses all the way up to first degree murders, I too know my way diligently around a courtroom and also tried cases in the civil arena as well. However, in order to lead, like John mentioned, over 150 employees, you have to have a documented history of doing so. And as the current director of public safety, I have a documented track record of creating collaborations, working closely with law enforcement, building programmatic efforts from the ground up, writing policy and procedure manuals so that employees in other departments can follow them. But one thing that makes me unique from the rest of the candidates is that I understand reducing crime cannot happen exclusively within the confines of a courtroom. And one thing that represents that is combat, which is also under the control of the prosecutor's office, the community-backed anti-crime tax, which is a sales tax collected from the entirety of Jackson County to be invested in violence prevention and intervention initiatives. As director of public safety, I work closely with the service provider community, social service organizations, and visual individuals affected by violent crime. And lastly, trust. Reestablishing trust with the community and the law enforcement is imperative to the prosecutor. And as a person from a neighborhood impacted by crime, I organically have the skill set to do so.
Thank you. We'll move to the second question, which is, what would your priorities be as the prosecutor? And we'll start with you, Melissa.
My priorities, first and foremost, is to clear more cases, especially violent crimes cases. In order to do that, I plan on leveraging technology in a much more advantageous way. Right now, it takes us a couple of months to analyze cell phones collected in violent crimes cases. I plan to expedite that to 48 hours like they've done in Las Vegas and increase our clearance rates upwards of 89%, just like they've done in Nevada. Also reimagining how we prosecute property crimes. Right now, all of the property crimes get lost in the sea of the General Crimes Division. And so I want to create a separate standalone property crimes division, but turn it into a law student clinic so that we can expand capacity, allow our licensed attorneys to focus on the more egregious and violent offenses, but yet still hold offenders accountable, make victims feel heard and advocated for, but also give our law students some practical experience to supplement their legal education and introduce them to the profession earlier. Of course, supporting victims and witnesses, as well as bringing the law enforcement community and the prosecutor's office closer together. As Director of Public Safety, I spend more time at KCPD headquarters than I do at City Hall. Once I mentioned building these programmatic efforts from the ground up and really backing up law enforcement. And so I've established a great rapport with them. And then lastly, of course, diversifying the prosecutor's office. Diversity brings value to any infrastructure. And when I was at the prosecutor's office, we had a lot of work to do, and we still do today.
Thank you. We'll turn to John.
Yeah, the first priority is to make sure that our victims are taken care of. And the best way to do that is to make sure that when a case comes in, it is resolved swiftly. Because what we know to be true is we can drive down crime if cases are handled in a swift and certain manner, and where appropriate, there's severe punishment engaged in it. And that will be for people that are the violent crime people, the trigger pullers. It'll also be considered for people that are chronic nonviolent offenders, because even though a crime is nonviolent, it doesn't mean that it's victimless. And so these folks that have come into our system in the past and have shown that they're not amenable to services and things like that, then we will make sure that they get introduced to sentences that are appropriate to make sure that they can't re-victimize people over and over and over again. What we have in the office right now is justice that is certain. We do get to the cases. We do resolve them in a way that is most of the time successful in dealing with the crime. And we're severe where appropriate, but where we're missing that link is when we need to be more swift, because that will build confidence in our office. And that is a big problem that we have right now in the criminal justice system as a whole, whether it be directly with the police or with the prosecutor's office. We need to have the faith of the community so that we can continue to have them come in as witnesses and advocate on behalf of our victims. So that is a main priority for our office.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Thank you. I will be providing swift and fair prosecution of these cases. I know personally that time is on the side of the defendant, and that by these cases languishing, that witnesses and victims become disheartened, they become disinterested, and they become discouraged with participating in the criminal justice system. I will also collaborate with law enforcement departments, the police chiefs and department heads, meeting with them at least monthly to make sure that we are quickly and effectively getting these cases charged and moved along. I will also be reversing the failed policies of the current administration by making sure that the property crimes are being effectively prosecuted, as well as the drug crimes. I'll be making sure that those who are suffering from addiction are being properly ensconced to the underutilized treatment courts, and that those who are suffering from mental illness are properly ensconced to that underutilized mental health court. I'll also be making sure that we have an actual conviction integrity unit. Jackson County leads the state in wrongful convictions. And so making sure that we have actual staff and policies in place to make sure that we are properly addressing those cases instead of people spending decades in prison for crimes that they don't commit. Also, I'll be making sure that I am standing with women by making sure that we are not charging women and service providers for exercising bodily autonomy in their own bodies.
Thank you. The next question is, what can the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office do to help prevent violent crimes? And what are your plans to prevent violent crimes and reduce the murder rate in Kansas City? And we'll start on that one with Stephanie.
Thank you. As I said previously, addressing the violent crime starts with the collaboration with law enforcement. Our law enforcement officers are out there, they're doing the work. Unfortunately, when they're bringing the cases to the prosecutor's office, they are languishing on desk for 8 months to a year before they're any charging, or if they're being sent back for more information, all of that time has passed, and then you can't properly get to those people. The way that you combat the violent crime is by doing deployment of resources prior to make sure that we are being proactive instead of just reactive. But from the part that we can handle internally, then making sure that we are charging those cases quickly and making sure that we're prosecuting those cases quickly so that the community knows that we have a collaboration with the police department and that we are working together to solve these issues. Right now, we have seen in the past year, 183 homicides, the deadliest in Kansas City history. And in order to get these rates down and encourage trust in the community, we have to show them that we are working. We have to show them that we are working together and that we are not going to stand for this in Jackson County. We have to be able to show that we take their information seriously and that we are doing the work and supporting our police officers and getting those cases cleared and solved.
Thank you. Melissa?
Yes, in order to reduce violent crime, which we actually are doing right now, homicides are down 25% from last year. And that is by and large thanks to a strategy called focused deterrence. It focuses on the 10% of people causing 90% of the crime. And so it's focusing our efforts on those that are wreaking the most havoc on our community. You give them two options after you identify them, who they are. Either avail yourself to services or land yourself on the prioritized prosecution list. As I stand before you today, I am already on the implementation team for the new focused deterrence strategy, Save KC. And I want to remind our voters that the last time we used this strategy in 2014 was the last time our homicides were under 100. It is still too many, but obviously much better off than where we are today. Trust. I mentioned it in my last or previous answer. In order to get witnesses to cooperate so that we can clear cases, they have to trust the office. And what instills more trust than a woman that it resembles the demographic most impacted by crime and actually lives amongst them and has the backbone to fight like she is personally affected, because she is. And crime prevention. I find it interesting that I am the only candidate that is specifically alluded to combat, which is a $30 million annual fund that we invest into grassroots organizations that are doing the real work. In some ways, they are also first responders, deploying to homicide scenes, wrapping their arms around grieving mothers to try to interrupt the cycle of violence before it continues.
Thank you, John.
Like I mentioned a moment ago, excuse me, where we are best at driving down crime is when things are swift, certain, and where appropriate, severe. So that is job number one to figure that out. The second thing is, when I was in the prosecutor's office the first time, I had a job as a community prosecutor assigned to the Central Patrol Division. And in that role, and it really was my favorite job in the office that I've had so far. And that's because I got to have an office in the police office in the station out Central Patrol. I got to go out on probably 50 ride-alongs with officers and see what they were confronted with. I did this during the daytime and nighttime, on the weekends even. And so I really got a bird's eye view of what was going on in the community. But more importantly, I got to go into community houses where people were hosting their neighbors, maybe up to 10 people at a time. And I would get to go and be the face of the prosecutor's office to the community. And it was in that process that I learned that where we work together with the community and with the police hand in hand, that is what drives down crime. Because if everybody is in a space and they're occupying that space, then there's no room and there's no oxygen for the criminal to also be there. And so the prosecutor's office, I think, needs to go back to a model that allows us, and me in particular, to be a face of the criminal justice system, where I can go into these houses again, meet with the people, listen to their concerns and their needs, and then adapt accordingly.
Thank you. Moving to the next question. Apart from violent crimes, how would you go about prioritizing nonviolent crimes to prosecute? And we'll start again with Stephanie on this one.
So we have property crimes that are not currently being prosecuted, and that is a huge mistake because those crimes snowball into bigger cases. So just take a simple car theft, for example, where guns are stolen. Those guns get in the hands of juveniles. They're used in robberies. They're used in murders. And because those crimes, that criminality is not being checked, then we see it go into higher levels of crime. We need to make sure that we're prosecuting those property crimes and prosecuting them effectively. But for your cases where you have nonviolent crimes like your drug offenses are also not being prosecuted unless they have a violent nexus. That is also a mistake because you don't want to delay somebody's deliverance. What you want to do is take advantage of these underutilized treatment courts that are at risk of losing funding because we're not using them. For those that are facing addiction, we need to properly put them in drug court so that they can take advantage of the opportunities of having free treatment. Also, the mental health court. because most of our demographic is dual diagnosed, where they're suffering from mental health issues and self-medicating with drugs. So you're not just treating drug addiction, but you're treating mental illness, anxiety, and depression. So we need to make sure that we are properly using those courts for our nonviolent offenders, and that we are prosecuting the property crime, because just because it's not violent doesn't mean there's not a victim associated with that crime.
We'll turn to John.
I understand there's a perception that the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office does not prosecute property crimes, and it's actually a misperception. The reason I say that is because you can look at the Jackson County Prosecutor website, and it lists every crime that we're prosecuting, and there is a lot of property crime being thrown in there. I think the problem is, with regard to that misperception and the lack of confidence in the office, is the fact that we don't communicate well with the community right now on what we are doing. We're not as transparent as we probably could be. We do have the information up on the website, but obviously people don't go to that very often. And so we need to do a better job to let them know what our successes are, and then also what our failures are, so we can own those and adjust. The other problem is property crimes are incredibly hard to solve. It's better now that there's some technology, but just this last weekend, I had 2 windows of my car broken out. I was one of 6 or 7 vehicles on my block. We all park on the street in Waldo where I live. And I don't have a lot of confidence that those crimes will be solved, because they happen when nobody was looking. The police came out, they responded to the scene. I couldn't have had a better officer come out there as far as professionalism and the way he responded and what he explained to me. Once he realized the scope of the crime, he called a supervisor who got more officers out there. They knocked on all the doors. But these crimes are very difficult to solve. But when they solve them, we do need to make sure that we have swift justice.
Melissa?
Yes. As it pertains to property crime, that is why I devised my plan to start a property crimes prosecution division, but turn it into a law student clinic. I don't believe Jackson Countyans want any more excuses. They want solutions. And that's why I've taken a lot of time to come up with concrete plans to tackle the issues plaguing our community. As it pertains to drug crimes, we have to resume charging drug distributors. Just look at the success that the Kansas Police Department has had. By aggressively prosecuting drug distributors, they have cut their homicides in half in just a 3-year span. And I fully plan on replicating that policy. But I also know that incarceration is not always the answer to holding somebody accountable. Here in the state of Missouri, we incarcerate more people than any other democratic nation in the world. And yet and still, we're coming off of a record-setting year. And so clearly, incarceration is not the exclusive answer. That's why I plan on starting a brand new diversion opportunity. Yes, we do have mental health court, veterans court, and drug court, but drug court is only tailored to the addicts. What about the distributors, the nonviolent distributors that are selling drugs to create means to support their family, etc.? And I'm not rationalizing it, but these are realities that we must confront. Where there is opportunity, there is naturally less crime. So I will be adding the opportunity court, where offenders will be connected to nonviolent offenders will be connected to workforce development opportunities, conflict resolution, and financial literacy training.
Thank you. And all the candidates raised some points on that last question that I'd like to ask a follow-up to. And that is, prosecutors have significant discretion, and taxpayer resources and your resources as prosecutor are not unlimited. You also don't want to over-prosecute nonviolent offenders, because that has the same impact on taxpayers and the accused. How will you balance your responsibilities as prosecutor in that respect to avoid over prosecuting and prioritizing resources? And on that one, we will start with Melissa.
The opportunity court is my answer, and I would love to expound on that. So nonviolent offenders that will be charged, because I do believe you have to hold individuals accountable so that they have a form of a wake-up call and an encouragement to start anew. But again, incarceration is not always the answer. So nonviolent offenders that make under a certain income threshold will be connected to modern workforce development opportunities. We have a bad habit in this country and this community of only telling high risk and return returning citizens that they can do construction. That is honest and lucrative work. But what if they want to be an educator? What if they want to code? What if they want to be a journalist? What if they want to explore being a paralegal? We have to make sure that we have the full slate of opportunities available to them. But a job in isolation is not enough. You need to know that your means of resolving conflict on the street will not translate well into the employment arena. In other words, you cannot curse your boss out and expect to keep your job. And lastly, financial education, learning about 401ks, how a union can protect your benefits and your livable wages, tools to build intergenerational wealth that are truly crime prevention that a lot of people have been marginalized from during the course of their lifetime. And so to make sure that we are not overburdening the courts, we have to create other alternate ways to hold people accountable. And the Opportunity Court is an innovative, creative, and specific strategy that I plan to employ in order to do so.
Stephanie.
So Opportunity Court sounds a lot like New Start diversion that is currently in place at the current court system that is also underutilized. And we can, again, utilize those underutilized treatment courts like New Start diversion, like drug court, like mental health court, and like the Veterans Court to satisfy those needs for the nonviolent offenders. Because I don't think any of us on this panel are looking to punish and incarcerate people who are nonviolent, except for those that are chronic offenders. Because when you see people that have taken advantage of those court systems that still choose to not be amenable to supervision in the community or choose to continue to take advantage and repeat those offenses, then we do have to take a stronger hand with that. Because we can't sit here and keep offering you the same opportunities and the same things when you consistently show us that you're not going to learn from your previous mistakes. So for first-time nonviolent offenders, then we have the treatment opportunities, we have probation, we have diversion, we have all of those things. And as a former probation and parole officer, that success is measured by how many people you successfully reintegrate into the community, not by how many people you send back. So they do provide that job training and that housing and that substance and mental health treatment. But for those people that are continuing to take advantage, then you do have to use a heavier hand, and those people will have to be incarcerated.
John?
Yeah, thank you. So a couple things. Number one of the ways that we make sure that we are being fair and just in our system and that we don't have arbitrary results, which cause people not to trust our system, is to make sure that all the prosecutors are managed in such a way that they have some discretion in how they resolve their cases, but that there are policies and procedures in case to make sure that everybody is generally in line. When we talk about policies and procedures, when I was in the Army, we had what was called a battle book, where we talk about everything that we did in training, and we would write it down in a book so that if the leader fell for some reason, someone else could pick up the battle book and then lead those soldiers in the same manner. We have a lot of people overturning in our office, and so we need to make sure that we have a battle book in place that says, these types of cases, this is what we're going to do with them. And then, like I said, have some degree of discretion, because we want to sentence not only the crime, but also the person. And that's where we go back into, if it's a first-time offender, or even a second-time offender with a nonviolent offense, we try to do these services with them. I'm in agreement with Stephanie that Opportunity Court has some great aspects of it. But what we don't have right now is a court. And when you were asking the question, how do we make sure we resource things properly? I'm not sure that starting a new court where we have to find a judge, find staff, find people that go along with it, and cost us an extra $300,000 to $500,000 a year is the best way, when, like Stephanie mentioned, we already have programs in place to do the same thing.
Thank you. We'll move to the next question, which is, how would you characterize the relationship between the prosecutor and the local police departments? And have any of you had one-on-one conversations with the new police chief about the state of Kansas City? And we'll start with John on that one.
It depends on what police departments you're talking about. If you want to talk about Kansas City Police Department, that then the relationship is damaged, but improving. I have reached out to Chief Graves to try to set up a coffee or something. We've not been able to do that yet. I have been out on occasion to talk to line officers in various jurisdictions. I talked to one from Lee Summit just the other night. I've been out and actually visited with the unit in the Independence Police Department, and I've talked to officers in Kansas City, and then of course in the Sheriff's Department. And what I've learned is, and I know this from being inside the office, there is a good relationship between line prosecutors and line police officers. We work well together in our cases. When I have a trial, a murder trial, for example, the detectives will come in and testify about what occurred overall. But the line officers are the ones that I can turn to and say, hey, tell me about these witnesses I'm about to call. And because they're engaged in the community, like I want to be engaged in the community, they know who my witnesses are on the block. And so they can tell me about the gentleman who, will roast a hot dog with them, or the one that has music violations, ordinance violations, being too loud that he goes by, but he's a nice guy. And they provide that information to me so that I can tell a story better in the office. So we do need to improve the relationship with the police, but that's at the top level between the prosecutor and the chiefs, and not so much the line officers who are just doing their job really well.
John, before we change candidates, use the term line officer. Could you just explain what you mean by that term?
Yeah, you've got command staff in the police departments, and then you have the officers who are doing the grunt work on the lower levels. They're just as important. The work that they're doing is every bit as important as the commanders. It's just that the commanders are the ones making the policies, and they're the ones that are most impacted, I think, by what we do in our office at a leadership level.
Thank you. We'll move to Melissa.
Collaborative energy trickles from the top down. And I have met with officers all over Jackson County, and I'll tell you more about that here in a second. But the relationship is fractured between the prosecutor's office and all of our law enforcement agencies here in Jackson County, due in part to some of the charging decisions by line attorneys, such as John Gromowski, and the charging decision that he made as recent as May 18th. And so we do have some relationships that we must repair. And in order to do that, I have sat down, of course, with Chief Graves, because I work so closely with her. I see her every Wednesday morning at Shoot Review. And we've also discussed my candidacy in detail. I've sat down with Chief Forbes of Lee Summit, Chief Iceman of Grandview, Chief Iceman of Grandview, and Chief Dustman of Independence. And I had a very real conversation with them. Due to my plans around technology, we can clear more cases and get more of these offenders across the finish line, including property crimes and drug crimes. But if I'm going to have your back, I need you to have mine. If there are patterns of excessive force, we need to invest in early behavioral detection systems. If we have wrongful convictions, I'm going to also start a standalone wrongful convictions unit and actually have a public-facing portal so that community can submit pieces of exonerating evidence to our office. We can work together having quarterly constitutional training so that we're all abiding by the 4th and 14th Amendment. But having each other's backs works both ways, and it can't just work one way.
Thank you. Stephanie?
So the relationship, I liken it to the citizens of Jackson County are like the kids in a bad custody battle between the prosecutor's office and the police departments. And we've got to mend that relationship, because when the parents are fighting, then the kids are out unsupervised and left to their own devices. And that's what we have. And that's why we have this increased rise in violent crime, this increased rise in property crime, because we are not being effective and we're not working together. As the chief law enforcement officer for the jurisdiction, as the prosecutor, you would have to be pretty arrogant and, dare I say, stupid to believe that you can effectively prosecute without the effective partnership and collaboration of the police. And as a mom of a son who's getting ready to start the police academy, I have to make sure that my son, just like all these other officers that are doing the work, are going to be safe. And so when I talk to the officers, the patrolmen, the ones that are out there doing the work and meeting the families, they're very disheartened because they're doing the work, but the current administration is not being effective. And so I always tell them, I'm looking forward to working with you and not against you, so that we can be better at collaborating and getting these cases solved and cleared so that we can move on to bigger and better things. But it starts first with building that bridge. And I plan to meet with our chiefs and our department heads monthly so that we can always make sure that we are on the same page and having a collaborative approach and showing the community that we are working together.
Thank you. The next question is, do you support the principles of restorative justice programs to address crime that focuses not only on the needs of victims, but offenders and the community. We'll start with John.
Yes, there are aspects of restorative justice that are fantastic. The idea that we can make victims whole or work toward making victims whole through programs that we have that are do not include incarceration. That's a great idea, and I think we've all been talking about that here tonight. But we have to make sure that we're measured in our approach, because we need to make sure that people that are trigger pullers, that are the violent offenders, have some sort of consequence that perhaps won't allow them to try to make a victim whole, because they will be going off to prison as trigger pullers and other violent offenders. The other cases that we talked about, the nonviolent cases, certainly we try to restore the person, we give them services, we give them opportunities to help mend fences with the victim where appropriate. We can make sure that they are receiving the education and the programming that will help them be good citizens in our community. So yes, there are aspects of restorative justice that we should be engaging with, and I think the office is already doing that. And so yes, that is a good program in a lot of aspects. We just need to make sure, though, that we're using it in the appropriate circumstances.
Thank you, Stephanie.
One of the things that I think that the current court is doing well is that we have mediation that is available in criminal cases. That was not something that was previously afforded years ago. And as a person who does mainly violent crimes, I have found mediation to be very helpful, because it gives both sides the opportunity to be heard. And so with the mediation, the state and the victim's family are in the courtroom. Myself and my client are in the jury room, and the judge that's doing the mediating is going back and forth. And it gives both sides the opportunity to tell the strengths and weaknesses of their case. And it's non-binding, but it gives the opportunity for the defendant to have some say in what's appropriate for a sentence. And when we're talking about violent crimes, appropriate is prison. And when and it gives the victim's family the time to have some say in what that decision will be. And all of the mediations that I have done, and they have all been on murder cases, we have come to a resolution, whether that be for a lesser included charge and is in a set amount of time, or whether it has been for just time, or we argue it out at sentencing. It has been greatly effective. So restorative justice can also work in violent crime situations, but you have to be able to come in with the understanding that it's about accountability and reaching a resolution that is amenable to both sides. Each side has some give and take, and it's been wonderfully accepted and very effective.
Thank you. Melissa.
Yes, thank you. In this country, 6 of 7 people that are sentenced to incarceration are coming back to the community that they left, meaning that we have to invest in their restoration to make sure that they are prepared to reintegrate into society. I am also a huge proponent of criminal mediations. I also want to leverage combat funds to expand our in-prison programming to make sure, once again, people are prepared to return to the neighborhoods that they once wreaked havoc on through violence. I also just spent my afternoon today speaking to a group of juvenile detainees at the Hilltop Detention Center. And we had a very, very real conversation. And I asked them specifically, what does restoration look like? Naturally, they said a job, hope, confidence. And so we need to make sure that we are funding programs that actually touch the people most in need and that can deliver those resources. And the way that we do that is a term called credible messengers, people with lived experience that have served prison time themselves, that are able to relate and resonate with young people and people in general embroiled in crime in ways that nobody on this call are able to. I do fairly well because KCPD relies on me to go out into the community and have real conversations with suspects. But sometimes we need a heavier hand, somebody that has walked that walk, somebody that has lived that experience, because it's not always about the message. Sometimes it's about the messenger, and it's not just about the services. Sometimes it's about who offers them.
Thank you. And the next question is, as a prosecutor, how will you respond to the victims of domestic violence? And will you provide those services to all victims of domestic violence, not just those who have a court date? We'll start with Stephanie on this one.
We have to take to consideration that not all victims of domestic violence want to assist in prosecution. And sometimes when that happens, we then want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We have to be providing services to those who want to assist and those who do not, so that the ones that choose not to, that we can then gain that trust, because we know the cycle continues, but we can gain that trust to let them know that we are still here and on their side, and that they have resources available to them. And we also have to consider that there are also not just women that are victims of domestic violence, but also men that are victims of domestic violence, and some same-sex relationships where you have domestic violence. And a lot of times those people are discriminated in the system, that they don't get the same services provided, or they're not widely believed. We have to understand that domestic violence is just that. It is violence between domestic partners, and that can be parent and child, that can be boyfriend, girlfriend, 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 boyfriend, boyfriend. It's overarching, and we have to be able to provide support, whether or not there's a charge filed, or whether or not it's declined, or whether or not that victim declines, because the issue is still there and it's still the same. And they need to know, those victims need to know, that we are supporting them in whatever capacity they need us to support them in.
Thank you, Melissa.
According to Judge Courtney Wackel, who is the presiding judge of the Kansas City Municipal Court, 95% of all domestic violence cases are handled at the municipal level. That has to change, especially the ones involving bodily harm, strangulation, and even crimes committed in front of the children within the home. As prosecutor, I am committed to getting those dangerous, felonious domestic violence cases back at the county level where they belong, with comparable and adequate consequences that marry the charges that we can file. And once we do file those cases, again, I'm going to keep saying this word a lot, because trust is at the foundation of my entire platform and all of my plans. In order for domestic violence or intimate partner violence victims to trust that the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office can deliver justice for them, we have to wrap our arms around them. Sometimes people don't flee because they don't have the financial means to do so. Sometimes they don't want to leave their dog. Sometimes they can't pay for daycare because now they are the sole breadwinner. So we need to partner with organizations like Newhouse, Synergy Services, Rosebrooks, and Moxa, and so many others, the Real Justice Network, and so many others, to make sure that we are wrapping our arms around our victims so that they feel more comfortable and able to cooperate and testify in cases without sacrificing their personal safety or their financial means to do so.
Thank you, John.
I've talked to city prosecutors and judges about the problem, I think, with cases going down to municipal courts that are really felony level offenses. And that has to do not only with domestic violence, but other forms of violence and even drug cases as well. I want to make sure that when I'm a prosecutor, I make sure that the police chiefs all know that all felony level offenses have to come to the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, regardless of what community they come out of and what kind of felony it is. Because we are best equipped to be able to deal with these types of cases a lot more than frequently overcrowded and understaffed dockets over in municipal court. In our office right now, we have victim advocates. These are very talented and trained people that deal directly with our victims. So a case comes into our office, and the victim advocate will be one of the first people to reach out to them from our office to make sure that their needs are being met. If there needs to be, movement from one place to another, if they don't feel safe, if they need some sort of resources, even groceries, because the person that did the violence has now been captured and is out of the house and they don't have resources. Our victim advocates do that with those folks. As far as people that don't want to cooperate, typically when that happens, they lose contact with us as opposed to our losing contact with them. So that is a problem, but it's not something that we can always fix.
Thank you. As you all probably know from your professional experience, many accused who are prosecuted are indigent and unable to afford a lawyer. So one is appointed and often represented by a public defender. It's also been documented that the Missouri Public Defender's Office, I think it's improved, but has had one of the lowest per case budgets. At one point, I think there was a statistic that it averaged about $325 per case. As the prosecuting attorney, what role do you see in ensuring that those accused of crimes have equal justice in court? And we'll start on that one with Melissa.
First and foremost, I will be sure that the prosecutors that work in my administration leave the gamesmanship, the unfair trial tactics behind, because that does overburden the public defenders who not only do not have a lot of financial resources, but have extremely high caseloads. And so we are going to do every single thing by the book to make sure that we are coming to the table as fair, as equitable, and as just as possible. I am also a huge proponent of bail reform. I do not believe that people that are accused, especially of lower level offenses, should remain in jail pending trial, which makes it more difficult for their public defenders to see them, makes it more difficult for their public defenders to work up their cases in an advantageous way, and then further delays their trial to where they can bring one of the most vulnerable moments in their life to rest. Also, pretrial supervision programs, which is a form of bail reform. I am absolutely committed to exploring financing some of those opportunities with combat funds, but at the foundation and the crux of how I plan to ensure that all defendants are treated fairly is making sure that my attorneys are operating completely above board and making sure that we are advocating at the legislature level and with our judges for different forms of bail reform.
John.
With regard to the public defender system, I believe it is still a bit overwhelmed and understaffed and underfinanced, and that needs to change. And I will be an advocate for that, because in order to have, like I said, a fair criminal justice system, one that is trusted by all, they must have trust that our convictions are solid, and not simply because we were smarter than, you know, some defendant or some attorney who happened to be assigned to a case as a part-time public defender or a special public defender who's not competent to do the kind of work that we're asking them to do. As someone who has 16 years of criminal justice experience on the defense side, a lot of my cases being Criminal Justice Act cases where attorneys are appointed, including on one of my death penalty cases where I was responsible for trying to keep someone alive. There were attorneys that were assigned to folks that were co-defendants in the case that had no business being on the case. It was at a time when the Criminal Justice Act was applied in a way that anybody could just put their name in and get a case, and they did. So that is something that we cannot have at the state level, because we have to have confidence in our convictions so that we're not doing the cases over and over again.
Stephanie.
I believe I'm the only one on this panel that is actually a public defender panel attorney, which means I take overflow cases for the Missouri State Public Defender Services. And I will say this, you will not find a better criminal defense law firm than the Missouri State Public Defender's Office. And I attend all of their trainings every year and receive the CLEs for going to their trainings, and they bring in world-renowned trial attorneys to train. Now, that doesn't necessarily address the issue of them being overburdened. And how you handle that issue is, I will echo what one of the things Ms. Johnson said about the bail reform, because I believe that when you're charging a case, if it is a case that you're going to likely offer probation, you don't have to request that the court issue a warrant for that arrest. You can ask the court to issue a summons. And if that person doesn't appear in court on the summons, then you can ask for a warrant to be issued, but you don't have to have our jails overcrowded by people who you're going to trust to be in the community by offering them probation. So making sure that when you're charging those cases, that you also know your case and that you know what you're going to offer, so that you are not asking for bond amount and warrants on cases that are not going to be jailable offenses in the first place. But also making sure that we are being diligent and being effective with making sure that we charge the cases appropriately, and that we know our cases at the beginning, so that we are not wasting the public defender's time setting cases for trial that we know are going to be probation offers, which is what's currently happening today.
Thank you. How will each of you handle repeat offenders in the criminal justice system, regardless of the severity of the crime? We'll start with Stephanie.
So with repeat offenders, there's a method in the federal system that I plan to bring to the state system where you are looking at the history and characteristics of the defendants, that you're looking at the likelihood for them to reoffend, the need to protect the community from future offenses of the defendants, and rehabilitative options. So when you're talking about repeat offenders, then you have to look at the crime that is charged, because if it's a nonviolent offense, that is an offense where you can afford maybe a second or a third opportunity. But when you are talking about a violent offender, then I'm not going to give you a second chance to commit acts of violence in this community. So if you are a person that is giving our community hell committing acts of violence, I don't have a second chance for you. I am all for wraparound services for you when you return to the community, because they are going to come home. And I'm for making sure that we have services in place to make sure they get housing and employment and treatment. But for violent offenders, there's no second chance. You're going to be incarcerated. But for my nonviolent offenders, then we have treatment services available. And I understand that when people are battling addictions, some cases are just footprints of an addict, where you've got your petty thefts and things of that nature. And no, I'm not going to seek to lock you up the second time for that, but I am going to make sure that you are getting treated and not offering you diversion when you failed at that, but doing something that's going to have more teeth to it.
John?
Yeah, like we've talked about before, and this is something I tried to be the Jackson County prosecutor back in 2011 when I went through a panel, and I went back and reviewed the letter that I wrote at that time. And I said then that violent offenders need to be locked up, and chronic nonviolent offenders also need to be locked up. We need to move away from the idea that because something is nonviolent, that it is not a serious offense. Now, there are some petty offenses, of course, and those people are the ones that are most amenable to service and opportunity most of the time. But the people that, like I said before, are chronic offenders that are doing things over and over and over again, even after we've given them the opportunity to re-engage in our community, after providing them services, after providing them training, after providing them supervision that will help them do what they need to do. If they continue to offend, then that needs to be addressed. You work your way back up the system. So we look at, as we talked about earlier, when you're sentencing someone, you look at the offense and then you look at the offender. If the offense, even if it's petty, if the offender is someone who is chronically offending, who has a background of multiple petty offenses, or even some violent offenses thrown in, then there's just no reason to tolerate that kind of behavior again. If you can't live safely in our community, then you cannot live in our community.
Thank you. Melissa?
Yes, I plan to address prolific offenders, repeat offenders, especially for lower level crimes, because I do agree violent offenders must be held accountable, and oftentimes, if not at all times, should mean prison. But for lower level prolific offenders, I'm going to address them with accountability, because I plan to deploy a lot of resources. We're going to be establishing a lot of programs, and I respect that my opponents mentioned the New Start program, but that started in 2020, and frankly, it has not been effective, nor is it expansive enough. And so I plan to beef all of our resource deployment up. With that, if you do not avail yourself of the help, similar to the focused deterrence strategy, if you do not take advantage of the services that I am taking time and care to offer, I'm going to make it geographically based. I'm going to make sure, if you are a person of color, that you have a therapist or a mental health professional that is a person of color. That increases the likelihood that you will avail yourself to treatment. If you are a person of color in Eastern Jackson County, I will find ways to make sure that you avail yourself to services. But if you don't, accountability will be on the other side, and oftentimes that will mean incarceration. I agree. We cannot turn a blind eye to repeat prolific offenders, because that sends a message to community, that we allow this code of conduct in our county, and I am not going to under my administration.
Thank you. All of you talked about the importance of a good partnership with the police departments. One of the things I think that the proliferation of everyone carrying phones with cameras has done has shown that sometimes police officers go too far and use excessive force. What role do you see the prosecutor's office having in addressing excessive force and making sure that law enforcement follow the rules? Melissa, we'll start with you.
Our current prosecutor, Gene Peters Baker, has given us such a gift, and that is the precedent that officers will and can be held accountable in Jackson County. You see, I am running for prosecutor to advocate for victims of all kinds, and the harsh reality, both nationally and locally. Cameron Lamb, Ryan Stokes, Terrence Bridges, some of our officers locally do victimize our residents. And so we cannot ask for accountability from community if we do not require and demand the same from our law enforcement officers. And the prosecutor, the elected prosecutor, is the #1 person that can carry that cause forward and that can make sure that our officers are conducting themselves in a way that is constitutionally sound with the residents of Jackson County's rights. Now, I do want to help and collaborate in making sure that that is the reality. We will be doing quarterly constitutional trainings to make sure that we stay abreast on all of the case law evolution coming out of the 4th and 14th Amendment. I mentioned early behavioral detection systems. That is something that is very important to me, and I will be utilizing combat funds to make that happen. An early behavioral detection system is something where a small interaction, a small negative interaction with the resident, something like discourteous speech, will land you in a full day of restorative training, because you need to understand every single negative interaction between a law enforcement officer and a resident makes it more difficult for the prosecutor to prosecute.
Thank you. Stephanie?
So I think that we all agree that nobody wants dirty cops. It makes our jobs harder, it makes the police officers' jobs harder, and it creates distress through the community. And so what we have to be able to do is stand by our officers that are doing the work. And that is the majority of the officers that are doing the work, that are protecting and serving. But those who are abandoning their post of protecting and serve, then we have to hold them accountable. And so that's one of the reasons I'll be having the monthly meetings with the department heads and the police chiefs, because I want to make sure that we are keeping an eye on the officers that are under disciplinary review. I don't want a blue line of silence. I want to make sure that we are taking the appropriate steps before it gets there. And, you know, in cases, when cases are getting ready for trial, we get what's called giglio material that gives the information about disciplinary history of those specific officers that are involved in the case. And so we're going to be reviewing that history coming into the prosecutor's office day 1, so we can identify those officers that are already flagged and causing issues. And right now, with our officers already being so poorly staffed, where we're hundreds of officers down, we can't necessarily afford to take them out of service, but we can make sure that, well, the ones that are needing to be taken out of services, we will remove those from service. But if it's discourteous speech, not taking them out for a full day of training, but sending them on a time where they're off duty to make sure they are getting the necessary training that they need.
Thank you. John?
As I spoke about earlier, our line officers, the ones that are out in the street doing the work, the detectives, the patrol officers, they are on a daily basis building trust with the community. I spoke about how when I have a trial in a murder case, I get information from the detectives that gives me the overall facts of what occurred, but it is those line officers who have built the trust in the community that are more valuable to me in the sense that they can tell me about my witnesses. And every time there is an act of violence that is inappropriate by a police officer onto some member of the community, whether that be a citizen who is just engaging with the officer in some fashion, or it's someone who is resisting an arrest, actively resisting, but the officer oversteps and commits a crime. Every time that happens, all that trust that is built up by the line officers goes away. So as a criminal, or for the criminal justice system to be trusted, it must not be arbitrary in how it addresses crime. And as the Jackson County Prosecutor, I will ensure that all who come into contact with the system are treated equally. That includes prosecuting anyone who commits a felony offense, even if they're wearing a uniform.
Thank you. As it relates to bonds and low-income, nonviolent offenders, how would you address those issues as prosecutor? We will start with John on that one.
When a case comes in, we look at what kind of crime occurs, and then we look at the person who's committing the crime. And we look at things like whether or not they will fail to appear. They have a history of being in court before and not showing up. And so there is a presumption by statute that will be enforced by the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office under my reign that says that people should be allowed not to be detained while they're awaiting trial. They are innocent until proven guilty, obviously. That is part of our system. So the people that are locked up, and this is on the judges because they're the ones who actually set the bond with our recommendations, and they can override any of our recommendations to make bond more strict or less strict. But we need to make sure that the factors that are supposed to be looked at, whether a person's going to show up for court or not, and then whether they pose a threat or a continued threat to the community or a witness or a victim. In those cases, they should have a higher bond. But our office does need to recognize that a $25,000 bond for a businessman who commits an offense is different than a $25,000 bond for someone who is scraping by who committed the same offense. And it should not be a tax on the poorer person. So we need to be mindful of that and make sure that the judges know those situations where it's appropriate to let them out.
Thank you, Melissa.
As prosecutor, I am committed to collaborating not only with law enforcement, but also with our state legislators as well, because I do believe that there are some state law changes that can help in this regard. Number one, I believe first-time offenders of low-level nonviolent offenses, cash bail should not even be an option. It should be a law in the state of Missouri. I talked a little bit already about the policies and programs that I plan to implement within my office, recommending non-monetary conditions for pretrial release or suggesting lower bail amounts, focusing on risk rather than financial status, making sure that we are being fair and taking into account people's socioeconomic backgrounds, their flight risk, and their danger to society when making the recommendations to the judge as it pertains to bail. And we need to make that systemic, right? Given how many prosecutors work within the office, we need to make sure that we are operating from the same set of expectations, and those expectations will come from me. We will have an outlined bail battle book, to steal Mr. Gromowski's term, to make sure that we are being uniform, that we are being fair, especially to offenders that fall under a certain income threshold.
Stephanie?
So when we talk about the presumption of innocence, I think I'm the only one that fully understands what that means, because a charge is no evidence that a crime has been committed. However, when you are looking at what an appropriate bail is, what the court considers is two things: whether or not you're a danger to the community and whether or not you are a flight risk. So you have to properly evaluate the charge that is alleged, but also the criminal history of the defendant and the failure to appear history. And for cases that you know are not going to be jailable offenses, like I said previously, you do not have to request a cash bond. You can request that the court issue a summons, because what I'm tired of seeing is people who are incarcerated because they are poor and can't make bond on a case where probation is the offer. If the offer is going to be for them to return to the community, stop clogging up jail space by having that person sit there because they don't have any money. When the better wisdom would be to know and evaluate your case prior to, evaluate what your offer is going to be. And if it's going to be a community-based sanction, do not request a warrant for that person. If that person does not appear in court, we have our answer. We'll make sure you're in custody and you have a ride the next time that you need to appear in court. But let's stop punishing people for being, in essence, poor, and put those spaces reserved for people who are a threat to the community and who are a flight risk.
Thank you. Have each of you ever had a case that you prosecuted that you had doubts about? And if so, what did you do about it? We'll start with Melissa on this one.
Absolutely. And this is one of my favorite stories to tell. I was a prosecutor in the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, and I had a felony theft case on my desk. The offender and defendant was accused of stealing over $100,000 worth of wine. Well, the defendant was the maintenance man in a luxury condominium apartment building. And as I dug deeper and I started looking at the timestamps of different pieces of evidence of him going into the resident's wine cellar, who was the quote unquote victim, my suspicions and antennas started to rise. A, the timestamps didn't match up. B, the evidence was wonky. And C, I know people. I probably know people better than any other candidate in this race. And I knew that the maintenance man accused of this crime probably wasn't a experienced wine sommelier, if you will. He was accused of stealing over $100,000 of bottles of wine, but only 2 bottles of wine were missing, and there was hundreds in the cellar. Once my antennas started to raise, I dug deeper, and I dug deeper because I believe in finding justice over convictions. I realized that this victim had filed an insurance claim on his wine collection numerous times before. With this information, I went to my trial team leader at the time and I begged and begged for us to dismiss the case. And after weeks of advocacy, that is exactly what I was able to do.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So my experience is a little bit different because I've done defense work. And I can tell you about cases that I've had that should have not been prosecuted. I remember early on as a young attorney, I had a case where my client was accused of shooting at his mother's boyfriend. He came to his mother's house on Thanksgiving. The boyfriend was beating up the mom. The boyfriend had a very extensive and long criminal history for domestic violence, for assaults, and had even served time for murder. While there, shots rang out in the neighborhood, and the police came, and the boyfriend accused my client of shooting a gun at him. My client had no gun, had not shot any guns, but he was taken and he was arrested and he was charged with assault first degree and armed criminal action. Now, that is a case that should have never been charged in the first place, but yet and still, my client had to retain an attorney. We had to run the gamut. And the day before trial was to commence, the Friday before trial was to commence, finally, the state, in its infinite wisdom, decides to then dismiss the case after we had to let that case matriculate for 2 years through the criminal justice system. So it's about making sure you have your information before you charge it, and making sure that when you know that you have the wrong case and the wrong information, that you dismiss it appropriately. And that's what I will be doing.
Thank you. John?
I have had a case, and I can't go into too many details because it's now back in active investigation. But I had a homicide case where 2 people were murdered and multiple other people were injured as part of gun violence. When the case was initially investigated, one of the surviving victims was cooperative with police, and he provided a statement. And in that statement, he indicated that a defendant that we ended up charging was the only one in a particular location where the initial shots were fired from. So the case was charged. It was a murder case, obviously, as we talked about. It had multiple people, like I said, who were victimized, both surviving and 2 that did not survive. When we did the depositions in the case, which is where the person is put under oath and sworn, just like they're going to be in trial, and the defense attorney has the opportunity to ask them questions about the case and their prior statements. This particular witness completely changed his statement and put a third party at the spot where the shots rang out. After consultation with my supervisors, on my recommendation, we did dismiss that case, and return it to the homicide squad for additional investigation to see if we can figure things out. The hard part of that, obviously, is then I had victims' family members that I had to communicate with directly because I didn't want anyone else explaining to them why we were dismissing a case and hopefully going to refile it sometime in the future. That was my responsibility, and that is something I did do.
All right, and we'll move on now to what will be the last question that I'll ask, and then we'll transition after this one to you all's closing statements to the group tonight. So early in the questioning tonight, Melissa, I believe it was you, made a reference to the need to improve diversity in the prosecutor's office. And the question for you all is, do you all have that same belief? And if so, why? What is the importance of that? And how do you feel that your candidacy is best to improve that issue at the prosecutor's office? And we'll start with John on that.
Yeah, one of the reasons that we want to make sure that the community is represented in our office is because we want to build trust and we want to be honest partners. And having diversity in the office brings different points of view on everything we do, everything we touch, whether it's our victim advocates, our paralegals that are putting things together, or the prosecutors themselves, or the investigators that go out and communicate with our witnesses and our victims. The better diversity we have, the more open we are to ideas that are different than our own. One of the things that Jean Peters Baker has done in the office while there is to start training for all of us about implicit bias. So we know what the biases are that we may have, and so we can avoid making those mistakes. One of the problems, we do a really good job of having a diverse staff. We are well represented in all different communities. Where we do have a problem is with trying to find assistant prosecuting attorneys that match all communities. The reason for that is simple. In the last study that was done by the Missouri Bar Association in February, of the people that volunteered their information, less than 5% of the attorneys that were registering were people of color. And we are competing with law firms that are looking for these talented attorneys of color so that they can put them in their offices just like we do. And we simply cannot compete with $200,000 salaries with what we have as a government. So we need to make sure we find people that have hearts of service that want to join us.
Stephanie?
So the prosecutor's office should be reflective of the community that it represents. Jackson County is a very diverse county, and we should have more people of color in those positions as attorneys, as victim advocates. And it's not that people don't want to work there of color, because that's just simply not true. Because when I first started practicing law, then there was maybe one or two African-American attorneys that worked in that office. And the problem that office had of why they couldn't get more talented Black attorneys was because, or minority attorneys in general, is because you wouldn't give them any floor time. So they would not give them any trial experience. And that was the main issue for a lot of the attorneys that worked there that were minorities. And so because they couldn't get that trial experience there, they started going to places like Wyandotte County. They started going to places like Johnson County, because not only could they get paid for their experience, they could also get some adequate floor time, because it does you no good to be there in the prosecutor's office if you don't get any trial experience and you're not able to effectively do your job. It wasn't just a money issue, it was a discriminatory issue. And we're going to have to change that, because you have to have diversity. The community needs to know that representation matters. They need to know that we are equally represented all throughout that prosecutor's office.
Thank you. Melissa?
As an attorney of color who started her career in the prosecutor's office and got substantial amount of floor time, so much so that I won office-wide Rookie of the Year my first year for trying 7 jury trials just in 1 year, I don't know if that is the issue. The harsh reality is we have to understand people so that we can be proactive in recruiting more diverse candidates. We need to be going to the HBCUs, to the affinity bars, LGBTQIA Association, the Asian Pacific Pacific Islander Association, at all of our local law schools, and at high schools as well, to expand internship programs at that level and intentionally recruit more diverse candidates so that we can expose them to the profession early, so that we can address deep-seated historical dissonance that does exist in this space. We cannot shy away from the fact that communities of color and marginalized individuals of all types have not always had the best relationship with the law enforcement apparatus as a whole, which includes the prosecutor's office, and honestly, the power of representation to finally, for the first time, elect a person of color to lead this office will ring true to one of my favorite quotes by a man by the name of Thomas Abt, Dr. Thomas Abt. He's a criminologist at Harvard University. In order for any violence reduction office, strategy, or program to be effective, it has to be deemed legitimate by the demographic most impacted. And who is more impacted than young people of color in the criminal justice system, which I am the closest to in this race.
All right. Thank you all very much. It's truly been a pleasure to interact with you guys tonight and hear all of your wonderful thoughts about this important upcoming election. Additionally, we would ask that you share the league's website with voters and encourage citizens to show up on each election day and exercise their important right to vote. And with that, we will now begin your 2-minute closing remarks. And we will start with Melissa on that.
Thank you, Charlie. Jackson County is ready for new leadership. Jackson County needs new leadership with vision and specificity and detail. And frankly, today you've heard a lot of diagnostic responses. We need to more aggressively prosecute property crime. We need to deliver swift justice. But I personally have yet to hear how from my opponents. Well, I am the candidate that has put so much thought, energy, and passion into this space, that is delivering concrete, detailed plans, because we certainly do not have the luxury of time on our side, understanding that Jackson County in some ways is as violent as it's ever been. And so if you are looking for a candidate that will be ready to get to work on day one, that already has a great collaborative working relationship with law enforcement, I'm about as back the blue as they get, but I am not blindly black the blue. I will protect our residents from police brutality and excessive force. But I also know, and I'm the only candidate that has consistently told this line and has not changed my messaging depending on which audience that I am in front of. We cannot only fight and reduce crime within a courthouse. I'm the one that has the political experience. I'm the one that has rallied different votes, like I will have to do at the Jackson County Legislature, to make sure that I can implement and build all of the innovative ideas that I plan to bring to this office. I am the one that is currently employing focused deterrence through Save KC, and I'm already at the table with the prosecutor, chief of police, etc. I am in many ways already on the job. And lastly, if you are ready for a candidate that can organically bring together communities that have not ever been on the same page. Just today, I mentioned to you that I was at the Hilltop Detention Center speaking with a group of juveniles. And one of the young men said something that will stick with me through the rest of this campaign and my career. I've never wanted to vote for a prosecutor or even talk to one until I met you. This is the intangible energy that I will bring to this office in conjunction with my experience, my leadership, and my detailed platform.
Thank you, Melissa. John?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone that has joined us this evening. I really appreciate you joining us, because this is a unique opportunity to be heard. Even though we're not in the room together, it is still very important that you listen to our messages so you can be in the best position to decide who you want to be your next Jackson County prosecutor. Now, earlier in the forum, there was a date thrown out of May 18th of this year, where Ms. Johnson indicated that I didn't charge a case correctly. The case that she's referring to is active in our office. It is still being reviewed, and it will eventually be charged in a manner appropriate. But at the time that I charged the case, and that was when I was an on-call prosecutor, where I actually go to the crime scene and see what occurs, I charged a case that is a homicide as an assault, because at the time we didn't have a cause and manner of death, which is required in order to show an element of the offense and make the charge. And even with Ms. Johnson's 1 year of experience, when she heard this information, I would have thought she would have understood that. But anyway, with regard to why I am the best qualified to be the next Jackson County prosecutor, I have a unique set of skills and experience that the others do not. I have been an executive officer of a 130 soldier infantry unit where I was responsible for the care and welfare and even the discipline, when appropriate, of soldiers. The people that are in this office right now are part of a law firm. They deserve leadership that has led large organizations before, because there's not time to be figuring out how to manage an office if you haven't done it before. The other thing that's unique about me is if you think it's important that the next prosecutor have defense experience, I've got more defensive experience as a defense attorney than both the other candidates combined. It's the same with prosecutorial experience. I have more prosecutorial experience than both the other candidates combined. So between my leadership and my experience, it really does make me the best candidate for the job. And I hope you'll vote for me on August 6th.
Thank you, John. Stephanie?
Thank you for joining us this evening. Violence is destroying too many lives. We've seen almost 700 murders over the last 5 years in Kansas City proper alone. Not Kansas City Metro, but Kansas City proper alone. Thousands have been shot. In my job, I've had the misfortune of seeing 3-year-olds with the back of their head blown off with an AR-15 in a drive-by shooting. A 15-year-old who was murdered at point blank range by 3 juveniles with high-powered assault rifles with holes so big in his chest that I could see the pavement through through his body. And I've heard your stories over the last 8 months, how your family members have been murdered, how information has been provided to the police, and the cases are not being prosecuted, even though you know who killed your loved one and that you've been cooperating. The property crime has been ballooning. You're coming out to your cars and your cars are being stolen. Your catalytic converters are missing. More violence. Wrongful convictions. We have people like Sandra Hemme, who spent 43 years in prison for crimes they didn't commit. People like Ken Middleton, who are still sitting in custody, waiting for their cases to matriculate for crimes they didn't commit. People like Ricky Kidd, who spent 20 years in custody for a crime he didn't commit. More violence. We see that our women's health issues are on the ballot. I had represented an 11-year-old girl who was brutally raped by her grandfather and forced to carry to term and have a C-section at 11 years old with her body completely scarred for the rest of her life. More violence. We cannot continue business as usual. This isn't just a law firm. We're managing pain and communities. This isn't about flowery programs and language. We need somebody with experience who can come in here and get this office together and bring our community together from day one. I need your help and I need your vote on August 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And once again, thank you all for your time this evening. We greatly enjoyed hearing all of your positions tonight. And with that, I will turn it back to Anitra.
Thank you. Thank you, audience, for your interest in the August 6th primary election. A recording of this forum will be available on the League's website, lwvkc.org, and on YouTube. Please take a moment to share our forums via your Facebook, Nextdoor, and other social media channels. We will have 5 more in the next 2 weeks. And remember, for voting and candidate information, visit lwvkc.org and vote411.org. Thank you and good night.